Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be discussing the article Freemasonry Isn't Dying, It's Refining by Robert H. Johnson.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have 3/4 of our usual cast here. We have Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham from Penticton number 147 up in British Columbia. Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth from King Solomon number 60 down in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel, and I am a member of Mill Creek Lodge number 243 here in Montlake Terrace, Washington. And unfortunately, Steve couldn't be here with us today, so we're flying a man short here. Our missing man formation here.
We're Steveless.
We're Steveless.
Is that like sleeveless? Not quite. Maybe. Maybe
we're short, Steve.
Well, Steve is short, so.
Anyway, so on to the article we're discussing here today. Today it was my turn to choose in our rotating scheme of who's choosing what, and we went with asked us to talk about the article Freemasonry Isn't Dying, It's Refining. It was written by Robert H. Johnson, who's and he contributed on the Midnight Freemasons blog, and I'm sure that David will hook us up with a link to the said blog in the show notes here. And it led to a whole bunch of other articles, which are sort of along the same lines of different things that are going on in Masonry at the moment. And for that matter, when I printed it out, the article itself was 1 page long. And then like the comments that went with the article were like 7 or 8 pages long. There's a lot of them. So I guess just to sort of kick things off, did you guys have any deep and interesting thoughts on the article itself, or sort of where it was going?
I like to. I think I don't like the word refining. I'd like to use the word right sizing. I think that's more accurate to what we're doing.
It's certainly along the same lines, I would argue.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think that's what he's going for, ultimately. But
Yeah.
I think he's the kind of guy too that would say that we're not only is it becoming the right size, but also maybe becoming better, or what maybe at least he thinks is better.
Okay, I agree that refining goes better with the metaphor that he's working with in the article.
And isn't refining usually taking something and making it less, but more specific of what you want?
Well, technically, refining is getting rid of impurities.
Ooh.
So we have to be careful. Have to be careful with that one.
Impure.
Well, is it really impurities, or is it just the things you don't want? We may call them impurities, but the things that you don't, it's not what you're, boy, this is going to be a great, this is going to be a great show. We haven't even got past the title yet. I mean, if you were looking for, if you have some material and it happens to contain copper and silver and gold, you may be looking for the gold, so you're refining it for the gold, but doesn't mean that the silver and the copper are bad. They're impure because that's not what you want. And so is it that you're just focusing on the elements that you really want and separating, if you will, or
Getting rid of that which does not work. As in refining a business concept? I mean,
Sure.
Would you like me to get the bigger shovel?
So the thrust of the article essentially is so you can find the if you go to the MSANA, the Masonic Services Association or Masonic Services Association of North America website, they collect data from all of the Grand Lodges. I guess in the United States, I didn't see any data there for Canada or Mexico, but we're Americans, so North America is us. But they have data there for going back into the early or mid 20s, I guess, of the population of Masons in various states. And there are some problems with the data, which they say on the website. Some Grand Lodges, I guess, count people who are in multiple lodges more than once, and other ones just count them once. And and some lodges count in apprentices. But in general, if one's comparing one year to the next year, it seems like it's a relatively consistent method for comparison. And essentially, that the population grew, or it shrank for a while during World War II, since starting in 1924. I should just call up the graph, and then it spiked right after World War II, and since then it's been going on the downslope of membership here. I used that info and along with some census data, and I tried to make a graph of my own here. Let's see here. I can. Now this makes good podcasting here. Watching some guy try and figure out how to display his data. So here we go. So this is a graph that I made that sort of compiles the Masonic membership with the U.S. population. So, like I was saying, the membership was pretty high. It dipped during World War II, and then it spiked up again afterwards. And then since then, both Masonic membership has been going down, and the population of the United States has been growing. And so the compilation of the two things leads us down to, in 2020, we were down to about, I think it was 0.2% of the population of the U.S. So that includes men and women and children and everybody. So it's not 100% great way to do it, but it was the data I could find. And down from over 2.5% back in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, that looks similar to I did a similar thing with because I was able to grab membership numbers actually for the Grand Lodge of British Columbia right from 1871 when we were formed. And if you look at, I actually did a graph but forgot the information, didn't bring it with me, but there's an incline till about just before World War II or World War I. Then there's like a slight dip, and then it shoots up in the 20s, dips down in the 30s, and then in 1945 it goes up to a high of, I think 1963 was the high watermark for British Columbia, and then it's been going down since then. And I think I did a similar thing, but I did it as a percentage of the male population 18 that was between 21 and 65, and I think right now we were sitting at 0.35% of that population. So it's similar up here.
Yep, that sounds very, very comparable. And again, it's both a function of Masonry shrinking and the number of just human beings going up at the same time.
Right.
That makes that percentage really, really plummet.
Right.
Jarrod, how new is your data?
How new is my data?
Yeah.
The last year that I have what I would consider to be accurate data be 2019, because I'm pulling them straight from our annual proceedings. So, and in 2020, they didn't publish the membership numbers, or they published the membership numbers, but they didn't publish how many actual lodges we had around. Like, so if you look at our numbers, and this is a total digression, but where our numbers, I think, are sitting about 6,000 is our membership number, which is roughly where we were in 1911. But I think we have almost twice as many lodges in our jurisdiction as we did back then. So it's, to give you, because our high water mark in 1963, I think there were 27,000 Masons in British Columbia. And now we're down to, I think, a little over 6,000. But that's, once again, I don't know because that's our numbers are based on each lodge reporting their membership. So I don't know how many of those members are actual plural members. I don't think it's a big enough number to actually significantly skew the numbers. So, yeah.
I wonder, I don't mean to jump ahead on Matt, if you're leading us in a particular direction too, but what he talks about in the article later was the idea of the number of lodges versus the number of members. And I think you hit a good point, Jarrod, that while the membership has decreased, the membership increased and the number of lodges quintupled, whatever, but as the membership has decreased, the number of lodges hasn't necessarily decreased with it. And so there's fewer and fewer Masons for the vast amount of lodges that still exist. And buildings to go with it, which is also another issue, right? That's a whole other half hour.
Well, I think that's the whole point of this article, is that we're working on an organizational structure that was designed for a lot more people than we actually have right now. And having been part of a Grand Lodge committee that was looking at the structure of Grand Lodge committees and whether or not we should be getting rid of some Grand Lodge committees, it's not easy to right size a Grand Lodge, because everyone feels that they're important enough that they should exist, even if maybe they should merge with another committee.
Many sacred cows think.
Yeah. Is that, we agree that the other committees should merge, but just not ours.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
So this is just by way of information, this is the MSANA data for, it's just the number of Masonic memberships. So it's the same curve you were just talking about, Jarrod, with the.
Yeah, like you see, you got the roaring 20s and then the dirty 30s. And then, sort of after World War II and then right back down again.
Yep. So it's my typical United States lack of geographic knowledge, global knowledge. The Great Depression that we often talk about, of course, in the United States, that affected you as well in Canada in a similar fashion. So because my understanding is that one of those one of the reasons of the dip was because of the Great Depression.
Yeah, it hit up here too. Yeah, it's the same thing up here. Is that you see after 1929, you see our memberships decline, and then they don't start picking up. Like it goes down, and then around 1942, 43, you start seeing the uptick again.
Right.
I think one of the, I am probably going to get yelled at for this one, but I think one of the worst things to happen in Freemasonry was that uptick after World War II. Was that I think that influx of membership altered Freemasonry and its purpose drastically and significantly enough that I think that it's affected us. We're talking 60 years later. That we've been on a downward spiral for and then the question, of course, is when I said right sizing, is the downward spiral a bad thing?
Right. Is it a loss of membership that is getting us to where we were before, or is it the death knell of Masonry?
Right.
And that was actually one of my thoughts in making the percentages graph, was that even if you say that in 1930, I guess is the first year I had both data for. If you say in 1930 we were the right size, percentage-wise we're a lot smaller than we were in 1930, and even raw numbers-wise we're a lot smaller than we were in 1930. So we overshot. if that was the goal, we right. Boy did we refine.
We're like 99.44 100% pure.
Exactly.
We're the ivory soap of.
I don't know that we want a purity test here, but yeah.
But also, wasn't there a lot of proliferation happening with Masonry and fraternal organizations in general in the early 20s and 30s, even earlier than that, even the 1800s, really? So we don't have the data prior to that, but how much of an up? So maybe there was an even smaller. Maybe there was another bubble essentially before the 1920s, right? So maybe Masonry should be closer to where we are, and that there was a 1950s bubble in the late 1800s.
Yeah, I know that there was the golden age of fraternities was shortly after the Civil War, I think, in the U.S., where there was a lot of guys came home, sort of like World War II. A lot of guys came home and joined Oddfellows and Masons, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was going to say there is the argument that could be made that pre-1920 numbers are what we really should be aiming at, because that's when you see the first big, at least in our numbers, that's when you see the first big swing up, is after the First World War.
And a lot of buildings are built in that 20s. I mean, like, at least out here anyway, for sure. A lot of the West Coast stuff. I mean, in Phoenix, I was just at the Phoenix Phoenix Lodge number 2 in downtown Phoenix, and it was built in 24. And just as an aside, our building in Auburn was built in 27. And that was the third one. The other two burned down. And then, I just was reading an article, unfortunately, about our Masonic home.
I'm sorry. I was reminded of a Monty Python. And that one down fell
the castle
over
in the swamp and it sank.
Sorry.
So, there was a lot of buildings built in that 20s, right? In that 1910, 1920, even 1930s. Seemed like there was a lot of building happening during that time, which is odd because it was just before, or just right when the Great Depression was happening.
Well, the Roaring 20s. I mean, the Robert Burns Lodge that I joined was formed in the 1922, and so we were number 243. So you figure up between 1860 or so, and 1922, we had 243 lodges form, and then from 1922 to 1921, excuse me. Anyway, the point is, in that 60-year period, we had 243 lodges form, and then in the 100-year period after that, we're up to 317 now. So that's only 70 new lodges since then.
Well, that's like the lot. My mother lodge was Emerald Lodge number 134, and they were formed, I believe, in the 30s. And when they amalgamated with another lodge in 2003, they were Pythagoras 197 or 194. So, between 1871 and 1933, they had 134 lodges, and then only 60 more in the next 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, that it seems like maybe most of the lodges were formed really in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and not, even though there's an influx of members, the lodges already existed.
Well, yeah, because let's see, 147, Penticton 147 is 1955 was when our lodge was formed. So 13, so it's like between 1930, most of the lodges were formed, at least up here in BC, it seems like most of them were pre-World War II. Even though the giant influx of membership was post-World War II.
So I wonder what that means then. So they weren't creating new lodges when we had the massive 50s influx.
Right.
They were just joining existing lodges.
Yeah, and just having the average number of members in a lodge growing. But then you also have to, at least with British Columbia, our population growth was mainly centered in the Lower Mainland. So there's a very small, there's a very small geographic area with a lot of population that wouldn't necessarily have the ability, they wouldn't need a new lodge building. They would just accept, I know that my mother lodge, Emerald, apparently at some point had 150 or almost 200 members. You'd never see, and once again, you never saw a lot of them in the lodge, apparently. So I think this whole point, is that we have built a system based on numbers that weren't necessarily maintainable. Is that the word I want to use? That it's
sustainable.
Sorry?
Sustainable.
There's the word I want. Yeah, because that's what the article's, basically the main premise is that, we figured we've built this structure based on a huge membership that was itself, it's like a housing bubble, or, it's just, and we're reaping the benefits of that.
Huh. It's interesting though to think about that, how that's, yes, as population was coming into, again, we'll just talk about Washington and BC. As population was coming into Washington in the Northwest, if you will, in the 1800s, late 1800s, and in the early 1900s, and men were coming in, and lodges were being formed at a very rapid rate, apparently, and maybe membership along with it. Now, what would be a membership increase? I mean, we think of, maybe 100 members or something like that, but obviously lots of Masons. But was that because Masonry and the lodge building itself was kind of the center of town, if you will? That's what brought men together, because there wasn't 400 other organizations and other social service programs and other charitable things. That's kind of what I've always has said to people. Well, that's kind of cool. Your building's in the center of town, and aren't Masons the charity of the community? And I said, well, they didn't have charitable programs. They didn't have Lions clubs and Rotary and.
But they did.
Not in 1900. There wasn't Lions Club. Lions Club didn't form until 1930s, 1935.
But it didn't. I thought Rotary was formed in the 1920s, wasn't it?
Could have been. But it wasn't. Even before that, though, there wasn't mean, there was there wasn't really hospitals, and there weren't, so it wasn't. I mean, not in you go into a new town, and the guys would get together and form a Masonic lodge before they might open a hospital or something like. Would they? I mean, I don't know. It seems that way.
But I know. But once again, is that just our perception of it, or is that the actual reality?
Yeah.
Because
I mean, in Auburn, for example, it was called the town of Slaughter before that. I don't know if he was a colonel or a captain or what he was, some captain, some military guy, last name Slaughter. And I don't think there was much of a town. Certainly wasn't like any kind of large hospital or anything. And it wasn't a big town like a Seattle or a big Vancouver or anything. It wasn't a big town necessarily. And so they formed this lodge, and then 2 buildings burned down. And within, by the 20s, they had built a really beautiful building.
Right.
So I don't know. It just seems like the Masons in the Masonic lodges, the buildings themselves, not the lodge people, but the building themselves, was a function of towns in those days.
I know, not to perpetuate our going down the tangent here. When Robert Burns Lodge was formed, they built the building in what is now Linwood. It was then Alderwood Manor, and they when they bought the property from the logging company that owned all the land around here, one of the conditions on them buying the property was that it had to be a brick structure, because they wanted to form a town here and they wanted it to seem permanent. So it was the second brick structure in Linwood, and everything else was up to that point was, whatever the loggers could throw together real quick. And so they were trying to permanentize. That's not a word. Trying to make things feel more permanent around here. And that was one of the reasons why they put that condition on there.
You've been eating too many Tim's Donuts. So did you get a flash? I didn't see it.
Yeah, no.
Matt defected today, and he went into.
I did. I went into BC briefly, but then I came back. So I got caught in the Canada Day traffic going into BC, which was silly of me. Yeah. So by the way, it's going to be late by the time this airs, but happy Canada Day to our Canadian brothers, and Independence Day to our American brothers, and
British Retreat Day.
What's that?
The British Retreat Day. Tactical retreat.
Yeah. Anyway, this is going to air way too late for anyone to still be thinking about that. But so there were some other interesting. Like I said, this article is only a page long, but there's a lot of meat here, which I also should, I guess, say that was, I think both Whence Came You and the Masonic Roundtable each did an episode about this article. So I'm just coming to it, 7 years late from when it aired on other podcasts, but I get there eventually. So the one of the things he talks about was that it was I think somebody mentioned just a minute ago that he asserts that in the early 1900s that it was from an educational standpoint was Masonry's peak, not necessarily its membership standpoint, but from a making impact standpoint, I guess. I was wondering what you guys thought about that. I guess my first thought on that was, how would you prove that? How would you quantify that number? But you guys have thoughts? Do you think there was a golden era of Masonry where everyone learned and became better men?
Well, I think I've already stated my opinion that there was a bad age of Masonry when we kind of got a massive influx of people and didn't really do much for the organization. So I would say maybe that, because it's hard to tell, because with the internet and everything nowadays, I think educationally, I think we are better educated now than 100 years ago. But I think from the purpose of Freemasonry's purpose of educating us and self-improvement through education, I would say yes. I think possibly that might have been a high watermark for us, and that it's been on a slide since then.
Yeah, I wish I could be a fly on the wall for about 50 years, from 1880 or 1890 to 1920, to really know what was really happening in Masonic lodges and initiations, and then after a guy, so as I would call the Masonic development, what was happening as a Mason for his development as a Mason? Do we fantasize that what we would like to see happening was really happening in the 20s, in the 1900s, early 1900s, that we think that they would get together and have esoteric discussions and deep philosophical things about ideas and what does this word mean and what does that word mean, or were they just sitting in a bar drinking, having a good time and talking about the world? And I mean, who knows? We don't really know. Maybe we can try and hope to identify some of that from some of the proceedings from years ago, but what they write down versus what really happened is probably two different things. I mean, they were meeting in bars, for goodness sake. Do we really think they were, I mean, not always bars, but in the beginning they were meeting in bars. So were they, and I know the idea of a tavern isn't really what we consider a tavern these days. It's more of a restaurant or whatever, or a place to gather.
It's actually closer akin to a convention hall.
Right. A place to gather. Yeah. And so, but were they really talking? Now, there was a lot happening those days too, right? There was new worlds being formed, new countries being formed, and new states and new territories, and lots of stuff happening. And so these minds, the guys that wanted to get together and make changes, would get together and make changes. And they wanted to form a club, or whether they wanted to be part of a club. And so maybe Freemasonry was a convenient structure for them.
I'm curious to find now. I know I've read an article that's about Masons who read and Masons who don't read, and I can't remember. I can't remember who wrote it. Some prominent Mason, Mackey or somebody like that, in the the 1800s, wrote this article that said, why are there so many Masons who aren't worried about or aren't thinking about these esoteric things? How come everybody's just here to glad hand and clap each other on the back? Yeah, so it's certainly been a theme throughout the ages, and as far as Masonry goes.
That is an ongoing, the idea of different opinions about things and the way it should be is certainly an ongoing issue. I hadn't heard that before, so that's interesting to know. I know there was an article when I was deputy. I found in a 1950s I should say, not already gave away the punchline. I found in a publication that it's talking about, hey, we need to come back to our roots and look at education, look at these ideas. And the guy said, guys, when would you think this was published? And everybody thought, just last year or something. And I said, no, it was from 1945 or 1950, whatever. And obviously there's stuff from 1920. And so, yeah, it sounds like it's an ongoing thing, the desire for education. And so if it's an ongoing thing, did it really ever happen? Did we just think it happened? Because that's what was written down.
Yep, I could not agree more. I just found the article. I Googled it while you were talking there and ignored what you were saying, of course. And the article was written by, it was Mackey, and he wrote it in 1875, complaining about Masons who don't read and Masons who do read. So,
1875, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we're.
Go ahead. Go ahead. We could talk about it in the next one.
Okay. So I will therefore cut you off and say thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast. We will have a whole bunch of links to stuff on our show notes. And speaking of show notes and such, as we discussed, this is a meaty topic that has a lot of roads you can go down, as you may have noticed from our conversation already. So if you want to give some feedback or have some thoughts on the subject, please go ahead and let us know on one of those things that we're on Facebook or Anchor or wherever you can make comments. And we're happy to read them and respond. And with that, thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.